Chapter 19. Love Finds Us. They say, those soft-spoken romantics, that love finds you when you least expect it, somehow sneaking up behind you after all of that loneliness and searching. It hits you dead on in your brain pan and touches your very soul. It sucks you in and steals your heart. It is a moment when you are looking down at the ground, trudging forward, innocently unaware that fate is coming down the highway, barreling along, making time, a load of bricks on its back. This deep and great love, it takes you and sweeps you away with no regrets or time for compromise. Christine Schuck. In the end, it was really Satan's fault. If it hadn't been for that awful creature and a very bloody finger, who knows how long it might have been before Jess realized that she was in love with David and he with her. So in the end, that damned goat got to live, despite her violent tendencies. Satan grunted, and her bloated stomach convulsed and twisted. David stared at the rear of the animal. "I think I see the head." Jacob sidled up next to him and stared as well. "Oh, gross, that is so cool." Jess had had enough of everyone. "Out, out," she ordered Aaron and Jacob. Satan had been laboring for well over 4 hours now, and Jess had missed breakfast and lunch and was hungry and cross and done with the circus act the pregnant goat seemed to be putting on. David eyed her warily. "You all right?" She just glared in return and eyed the retreating kids. Jacob foolishly spoke, half inside the sanctuary of the house, half of him still in reach. "But Mom, I said out." The door slammed shut, and she relaxed somewhat and turned back to Satan. "This effing goat had better have a girl this time." "Still going to turn her into stew?" "You're damned straight I am." Despite her tough words, she stroked the pregnant goat as the kid's head slowly began to emerge. "Come on, Satan, you can do it." Out slithered a kid, covered with blood and definitely, oh, quite definitely, another damn male. Jess cussed low and furious. "Damn you, Satan, another boy?" The goat's stomach convulsed and writhed again. David stopped staring at Jess's tousled blonde hair and turned back to the goat. A few seconds later, he was holding a tiny, damp, newborn kid and grinning. "Looks like a girl to me." Satan made a strange sound, and David's grin slipped as he stared at Satan's rear in puzzlement. "What is it?" Jess asked, sounding concerned. I think she's having triplets." "You are shitting me." David arched an eyebrow in mock shock. It was a rare thing to hear Jess curse, and she was always after him to watch what he said in front of the kids. "No, crap, here it comes." David shoved the slimy, damp newborn kid into Jess's arms and reached up in time to catch the third one before it slid out onto the hard concrete. He examined it quickly and looked up with a grin. "Would you believe it's another girl?" As if sensing her days were numbered, Satan reached back and bit down hard on the hand resting near her flank. Jess dropped the floundering newborn kid and recoiled away from the vicious animal. Blood flowed freely and brought tears of pain into Jess's eyes. "Oh, damn it all to hell, that really hurts." David was at her side in an instant, applying pressure and wrapping the finger in a clean cloth. They had a pile of them there on the floor for toweling off the newborns. The minute he touched her, smelled her hair near his face, it made him crazy. And today was no different. He'd been avoiding being alone with her for weeks now. It was just too much, these feelings he had when she was nearby. The slightest touch, the smell of her, even her smile, and his body would vibrate from deep inside. And all the while, he wondered if she even knew how much he wanted her. At first, he had told himself that he was just horny. It was natural, normal, and they weren't related, after all. But it seemed as if they had known each other forever. He told himself that she couldn't see him that way, because he was younger and she'd taken care of him when they first met. He'd only been 11, and her 15 and pregnant, and both of them as lonely as scared could be. For years he'd thought of her just like that, just like the moment they had met, a big sister figure, alone just like him and Tina. But something had changed. First, the dreams had come, bringing visions of soft lips, deep blue eyes, fantasies of her lying naked in his arms. After a few of those dreams, and blushing furiously when he looked at her across from him at the breakfast table, he'd headed east on a week-long hunting trip, hoping to get his head, both of them, screwed on straight. Along the way, he had found Elle Beringer alone picking mushrooms in the woods, and she'd showed him what he'd only dreamed and fantasized about. It had taken the edge off for a while. Whenever it got bad, he went on another hunting trip and looked up Elle at her cabin where she lived alone and traded mushrooms and wild carrots for some fresh goat's milk or eggs. She'd asked him to stay once, and he was tempted. The sex was phenomenal, but something kept pulling him back to the little house in Belton. One day, after many months, he'd stopped by Elle's to find her with a swelled pregnant belly and a man by her side. The tiny cabin had doubled in size, new wood gleaming in the sun. Elle was a good woman. He was glad to see her settled and happy. She introduced her man, Mike, and they sat and ate supper together before parting ways. "You're a million miles away." Jess's voice brought him back to reality, his face inches from hers. "You okay?" He looked into her eyes. They were a deep crayon blue, and before his brain could come up with a million reasons not to, he leaned in, reached one hand up into her soft blonde hair, and pulled her close and kissed her. The kiss lasted several seconds. Her lips were soft, and she made a quiet, almost purring sound in the back of her throat. He found it to be incredibly sexy. When they broke apart, he was terrified to even look her in the eye. What if he looked up and saw pity? What if he saw a look that said sister or friend and not lover? He had wanted to kiss her, to know the feel of her skin and lips against his own for so long. He could not bear the thought of her not wanting him back. Jess was stunned by the kiss. More than anything, she was shocked by her response to it. Her whole body thrummed. She'd avoided men for so long, kept herself safe by sticking to the family, hiding behind the children and their needs in order to never have to be attractive or attracted to another man for the rest of her life. So why did she want to grab him by the shirt, pull him back up against her, and have him kiss her again like that? At that moment, the door to the garage opened and saved them both from whatever foolish words they might have uttered next. Jacob flew into the room. "Oh, wow! 3 baby goats! Satan had triplets!" Becca was at his heels, bouncing up and down, and Aaron followed silently. Although she could speak, she still chose silence more often than not. Old habits die hard. Jess and David had practically jumped apart when the door opened, and while Jacob had eyes only for the newborn kids, little Erin gave them a once-over and smiled secretively at them before turning her attention to the newborn. She was a perceptive little girl. The rest of the day was consumed with cleaning up the afterbirth and making sure all 3 newborns were nursing well. Satan was looking fine, despite the strain of multiple offspring, and Apple kept his distance from the tiny family unit after Satan bit his neck when he sniffed the newborns. Jacob was singing some impromptu song about goat curry, stopping only to ask what exactly curry was, and Becca had asked to name the newborns Damien, Lucifer, and Beelzebub. When reminded that Lucifer and Beelzebub were both male names, she was quick to note that angels were androgynous, and after all, that Satan wasn't particularly a girl's name either, so the names stuck. In later years, their names would prove to be frighteningly accurate. Both girls took after their mother and exceeded her in viciousness. Damien ended up being the gentle one. Lucifer and Beelzebub ended up in the stew pot long before their mother did. Jess and David avoided each other's eyes and busied themselves with chores and dinner and cleaning. Jacob and Aaron ran and played for most of the day outside and fell asleep, deep asleep, in the middle of the living room floor by the 4th page in the book Jess had begun reading to them, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Jess's voice faded to a whisper as she surveyed the limp bodies at her feet. They were wrapped in blankets and breathing even and deep. She raised her gaze to meet David's. He had been staring at her steadily for the past 10 minutes, slowly convincing himself that she hadn't said no to that kiss. She'd even touched his hand lightly, caressingly. Earlier, when asking him to pass the salt, she smiled at him nervously, broke eye contact, and stood up. Negotiating around the limp, sleeping bodies was difficult. The floorboards creaked noisily and caused Jacob to shift and mutter in his sleep. Jess negotiated her way to the dark hallway and the open door to her bedroom. Her heart gave a thump of surprise as she realized that David was inches from her. He had been silent in his approach. Standing this close, she realized he was nearly half a foot taller. When did that happen? She asked herself. Damn it, but he was close. Mere inches separated them. Maybe we should talk about this, she began to say to him, her body beginning to thrum. Was his only reply. He pulled her against him gently, sought out her soft lips in the darkness, and kissed her. Unlike their first kiss, there was no question in this one. Their tongues met, entwined, teased, and intensified. She made one more attempt. The kids, they might wake up. She felt annoyance, not at David, but at herself for even mentioning the kids. It wasn't what she was worried about, not really. By this time, they had somehow made their way inside of the bedroom. He closed the door firmly and quietly behind them, and pulled Jess close to his body. He threaded his fingers through her soft, blonde curls. She had cut it short just the one time, before their journey back to Belton. Ever since, she had let it grow long, only trimming the rough split ends away, and it was now past her back, a riot of curls and waves. He leaned in to the curve of her neck, whispering against her skin, "This has nothing to do with the kids. This is between you and me. The kids will be fine out there." Before she could protest any further, he pulled her down onto the bed and covered her mouth with his. She found her hands moving along his body, pulling at his shirt, sliding her hands along his ribs. Clothing melted away. Her shirt tossed over there, a shoe clattered to the floor. His tongue and mouth moving along her neck, down to her breasts, sliding a hand into the hem of her pants. She stiffened, almost imperceptibly, but he felt it. He stopped. His voice was soft in her ear. "I love you, Jessie, and I would never hurt you. You know that, right?" She nodded, unable to trust her voice. The fear and memories had just hit her and then, just as quickly, passed through her. And a few moments later, the unexpected pleasure of lovemaking, not just sex, was mind-blowing. For years she had avoided men, avoided the thought of ever being close to another. But this was physical love, with someone she had spent the last 10 years living and working next to. It was familiar, yet completely new, and she hadn't felt anything like it before. Tears followed. There were so many tears that he became confused and worried he had frightened or hurt her until she told him that she loved him too. He held her then, covered her with a quilt and pulled her close to his body until she stopped crying and fell asleep in his arms. It was now that he could see so clearly the horror that she had experienced in the enemy camp those 10 years past. Nothing could erase those memories, and he knew there had been no one since, no man to show her any different. He fell asleep that way, holding her close, listening to her soft breathing. David was having an amazing dream, more of a fantasy, really. In it, Jess was running her mouth and tongue along his neck, stroking his chest. "Wake up." He opened his eyes and saw her above him in the gloom, her hands on his chest. She nibbled his fingers and smiled at him in the dim moonlight. "I promise I won't cry this time." They made love again, her body writhing in pleasure beneath his. His heart was racing, and her body, dear Lord, it felt so good to be inside her. He held her close afterwards, their bodies wrapped around each other, legs and arms entangled. "David?" He had been slipping back into sleep again. "Is this?" Jess's voice faltered. "Is this for real?" "God, I hope so." David laughed, nuzzling her neck, kissing her shoulder lightly. Jess squirmed a little. His face was scratchy and it tickled a little. "How long have you felt this way for me for a while?" "The last year, give or take a few months," he said, kissing her again. "How did I not notice?" Her tone was tinged with wonder and exasperation. He shrugged. "I did my best to hide it. I figured you wouldn't take me seriously." Jess laughed. "Wow, if that's what I've been missing out on for the past year, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything." And he leaned over and kissed her again, his hands caressing her body. Not a single thing. Their lips met in the dark, and after that, there were no more words until morning.